Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Philosophy Hour of Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we look at the political aesthetics of Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke is the famous Anglo-Irish statesman and philosopher. He is generally remembered for two important treatises, one in philosophy and the other in political philosophy. Those works are an inquiry into the sublime and beautiful and the reflections on the revolution in France. I actually wrote my MA thesis on the political aesthetics of Burke, connecting his aesthetic outlook to his political disposition. So here it is important and essential to see how these two seemingly different aspects of Burke do in fact connect, and why the study of Burke's politics is inseparable from a study of his aesthetics, as well as what his aesthetics mean to an understanding of politics. Burke's dichotomy of the sublime and beautiful influenced Romanticism, both in the literary arts and in intellectual philosophy. Burke identified the sublime as, quote, "the passion caused by the great and sublime in nature, when those causes operate most powerfully, is astonishment. And astonishment is that state of the soul in which all its motions are suspended, with some degree of horror," end quote. So for Burke, the sublime is related to a feeling of astonishment. It is also when our desires, our emotions, our life is suspended temporarily. Anyone who knows Arthur Schopenhauer can see the connection there with the idea of aesthetics and death. And Burke also associates the sublime with horror. Basically, the sublime for Burke is astonishment and horror. The sublime is the manifest feeling and experience of dread terror, a feeling of insignificance in the face of something monumentally overwhelming. The sublime also, as Burke says, frequently ends in death. Quote, "Fear or terror, which is an apprehension of pain or death, exhibits exactly the same effects, approaching in violence to those just mentioned in proportion to nearness of the cause and the weakness of the subject." If you want to look at it another way, the sublime is a feeling of ecstasy in an aesthetic encounter. In contrast to the sublime, the beautiful is marked by a pleasing delicacy and a feeling of love. As Burke writes, "The passion of love has its rise in positive pleasure." The experience of beauty is the experience then of positive pleasure, of love, of the pleasantries that make one feel at home with beauty, as opposed to the dread horror or terror of the sublime, which is best experienced at a distance, lest one suffer pain and death. Beauty, therefore, has a feeling of peace, serenity, pleasure. Beauty is something that doesn't horrify us. It draws us to it. It makes us feel at one with it. For instance, if you can think of a differing aesthetic experience in your life, Burke would say the beautiful is that which made you cry, that which made you feel at one with what you were encountering, while the sublime is something that filled you with ecstasy, excitement. It made you feel insignificant compared to its largesse. It is important to note that Burke doesn't actually reject the sublime. As a matter of fact, Burke believes that human nature has an instinctive appetite for the sublime. The want for mystery and feeling of anguish associated with the sublime was once the staple of all religion. In a desacralizing world, in the aftermath of the Reformation and the Industrial Revolution, and the emergence of urban society that was bringing geographic dislocation and a new way of life, Burke's Sublime and the Beautiful is an attempt to navigate the new world and offer a defense of the need for the sublime in life, because our instinct and our appetite for the sublime is part of human nature. Burke believes that the sublime is an intrinsic want in humanity. We must therefore make some room for it, but we should make room for it in a way that is not destructive. Originally, that was what religion offered. For Burke, this is now what aesthetics and art and music is going to offer. That said, Burke still privileges the beautiful. He prefers the beautiful to the sublime because the beautiful is what gives life, because the beautiful is associated with pleasure and love. General society and good society, Burke writes, is constructed around the beautiful. The beautiful is more common than the sublime. Human nature also has an appetite for the beautiful. We want pleasure, we want love. We want the beautiful because the beautiful gives us pleasure, a sense of tranquility, serenity, a sense of home. Concerning politics, then, Burke's revulsion at the horror of the French Revolution and its manifestation of terror was predicated on his understanding of the sublime gone awry. After all, he called the French Revolution, in his reflections, the most astonishing event in the history of the world up to that time, and recall back that he associated astonishment with the sublime in his inquiry in the Sublime and Beautiful. Not only did the French Revolution and terror produce a feeling of dread astonishment in Burke and many other observers, just as Burke asserted in his inquiry that the sublime often leads to pain, suffering, and death itself, so too did the French Revolution chart this exact course, and it did so in a destructive way that threatened all of society and civilization, rather than the self and the soul. Revolutionaries embrace the politics of the sublime because the sublime has been stripped from their lives. Revolutionaries tend to be irreligious. Therefore, they find no feeling of the sublime in religion and mystery, which they have rejected. Revolutionaries also seek to destroy, to tear down, which is another manifestation of the sublime, projected outward rather than inward. Burke explained that the want for the sublime was a want for pain. Revolutionaries want pain, just not for themselves, but on their enemies, or those whom they feel are deserving punishment and pain. The revolutionary psyche, according to Burke, is the external realization of the internal desire for the sublime. It is the sublime let loose. Per Burke, of feeling little more can be said than that the idea of bodily pain and all the modes and degrees of labor, pain, anguish, torment is productive of the sublime, and nothing else in this sense can produce it. Pain, suffering, anguish, torment is all the sublime. The feeling of bodily pain, torment are the productive sublime, and this leads to the present destruction of the person, according to Burke, and that's exactly what revolutionary politics ends up manifesting. It is the sublime brought to the point of destroying other people. Against sublime revolution, then, is beautiful conservatism in Burke's outlook. Burke's defense of English society and the English Constitution and the rule of law were a result of his desire and appreciation for beauty. There is beauty in good society, there is beauty in general society, in which men and women live together in relative harmony with one another. Those societies that take into account the lives of the dead, the living, and the to-be-born reflect that beauty of harmony of lives, the harmony of past, present, and future, which Burke wrote in a letter to a French nobleman, represents social freedom. Freedom, in its truest form, is harmonious and beautiful. Further, because Burke associates beauty with home and society, it isn't a surprise that he praises the role of families and the little platoons in the Reflections. That is the first instantiation of the experience of beauty and love in our lives. Our first experience of beauty is in our homes and with our families, and we would never seek to destroy our homes and families, even though that is what the sublime revolutionary spirit does. It destroys families, it destroys homes, and it ultimately destroys society. There is a peaceful pleasantry to beauty which causes us to want to defend it. As Burke also writes, an appearance of delicacy and even fragility is almost essential to beauty. In beauty's fragility, we realize how delicate beauty actually is and how delicate love is. And when we realize the fragility of beauty, we do our uttermost to protect it. This is a basic human impulse. While Burke's political aesthetics endorse the beautiful over the sublime, it is important that we remember that the desire for beauty and the sublime are all part of human nature. The totalitarian and revolutionary spirit, that is the sublime, is very much part of the human condition and can rear its dread terror at any time. Consider how the 20th century totalitarian movements, from Nazism to fascism to communism, were all very sublime in their aesthetic, and they all led to death and destruction when implemented and realized. Burke was aware of the danger of the sublime and sought a non-political means to allow people to experience it. When the sublime transverses into politics, we see destruction, we see despotism, we see tyranny. Aesthetic experience and religious mysticism were the two key aspects of Burke's articulate defense of the sublime. Why? Aesthetic pain and religious dread are psychological and internal, and therefore not directed at the present destruction of other persons. It is a feeling that you have as an individual, as part of your human nature, and aesthetic pain, experience, and religious dread, if you are able to find that outlet in art, aesthetics, or religious ecstasy, that is where you should experience the sublime. However, when those things are taken away from us, the human impulse for the sublime is castrated, but it will always find a new outlet to manifest itself. And when it manifests itself in politics, we see revolution, we see terror, we see horror, we see destruction. The advent of the French Revolution and the totalitarian movements of the 20th century revealed where the sublime now manifested itself. With the loss of art and religious belief, the sublime navigated into politics, and the politics of the sublime is always totalitarian, it is always overbearing, and it always leads to death and destruction. And when politics is a battle between the beautiful and the sublime, as it was for Burke in the French Revolution, Burke defends the beautiful.